I mean, one interesting thing I found was that, well, not only the American-British thing, but also because that's the thing, The White Lotus is still, I would say, to date, probably the most watched thing I've been a part of. And so in the UK, for a time, like a lot of people sort of knew me mostly as a writer-director, you know, like somebody who created a comedy show and had directed films and stuff. And so I feel like there's still a little bit of like a kind of, well, hang on, but aren't you the guy from the White Lotus? Like, to marry those two people together, you know.
Will Sharpe is having a moment, and he's loving every second of it. I recently chatted with Will about his new limited series, Amadeus, on Starz. Now, he plays Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I never know if I'm saying that right. Wolfgang. I mean, the Midwestern in me wants to say Wolfgang. He plays Amadeus, okay, against Paul Bettany, which is, I mean, Paul Bettany is like one of the best actors out there. And this pairing is exactly what you asked for. I mean, it is just, it's very exciting. And the two of them, the energy that they bring to these roles, it's if you know the film or if you know the stage play, of course you know the story. But what makes the Starz series so exciting is that it expands it so that you can really get into areas of this relationship that the film or the stage play just can't, because they're limited to time. And that's what makes this show so exciting. And Will is so good in this role. He brings this sort of, I mean, it could easily go camp. You know what I mean? Like, Amadeus' character is over the top and is definitely eccentric, and it could easily go in a camp direction, and he doesn't go in that direction. He goes in a really real direction, which I think was really refreshing watching it, and it was a really fun watch. And I've been a fan of Will's for years now. I mean, of course, everyone, at least on the U.S. side, first was introduced to Will because of The White Lotus. Since then, he's done a lot of great work. I mean, I really loved the Lena Dunham show Too Much with Meg Stalter. I thought that was so great. Netflix canceled it. I was so bummed because it was such a great, interesting love story. And Will's been doing some really interesting work ever since White Lotus. And we talked a little bit about the impact of White Lotus on his career and how in the UK, he's known, of course, as a writer-director, and he created his own comedy with Flowers, and he's done so many different things over in the UK. But on the US side, a lot of it is just him being that guy from White Lotus, which is, I think, really funny and interesting, and how two different countries that both speak English can have two very different relationships with an actor. This is a great chat with Will. I really think you're going to enjoy it. So sit back and grab a snack, because I will be right back with Will Sharpe. So the show's fantastic. You should be very happy. You. I mean, it is, something. I mean, when I was watching it, I kept thinking, obviously, the film was front and center, the film and the stage show. Like, that was front and center because that's my only real experience with it. And so how do you approach making it your own?
I mean, I suppose, like, you know, creatively that starts with Joe and Julian and kind of their imagining of the world and the way Joe's constructed the story. And I felt like one key difference, I suppose, between this and the play and the film, to a degree, is that, you know, there's a little bit of space, it being 5 hours, to explore different points of view. And so where in the play it's sort of unilaterally, I'd say, from Salieri's perspective, there's a bit more space to sort of sit with Amadeus, sit with Constanza in this iteration. And to be honest, I sort of approached it in the end like I would any other acting role. You know, I was trying to, you know, who is he on the page? What can I bring to this person? You know, how can I find a way into him? And the one key difference was that there's lots of music to draw on, like, you know, and that's like quite an unusual resource. You don't normally have that. And all of this music, you know, came from the real person. And is an expression of something, you know, that he really felt or thought. And so I found myself listening to his music quite a bit, just in a sort of like background, sort of almost like meditation way, you know, sort of without getting too in my head, but just sort of having it on.
Yeah, how much, I mean, with the music, that's something that I was thinking about too. Like, obviously it plays a part because it is the part, you know, of course. Yeah. But yet, how much can you figure out about the man just from the music?
Well, that's kind of what I was sort of fascinated by in a way, was that there's such a tonal range in his music. So like at one end there's like very playful, fun, light-hearted melodies, and then at the other you've got these huge, grand, dark operas, and trying to make sense of all of those different colours and trying to make them sort of cohere within one human being. That was like quite an interesting challenge. And on the page also, like, he arrives in Vienna sort of full of this kind of innocent optimism, and then over the course of the series he's kind of ground down by Salieri's machinations, by God's plans for him, by other circumstance, into a more desperate, darker, frailer human being, and sort of trying to track that journey and just find sort of oblique clues in the music. I felt like I was quite grateful for that, I suppose.
I mean, in general, when you approach a part, how much does music actually play? That always fascinates me with actors.
I mean, I will make a playlist, and sometimes that's a big part of it, and it's really helpful, and it's how you sort of get a sense of, and other times not so much. It's just sort of like as an exercise, because why not? But I did find, with this character, it was a huge part of the preparation process. I read about his life as well, but this being like quite a famously fictionalized version of the story, I sort of tried to take all that with a pinch of salt. It was my attitude was, well, that's to take or leave. Yeah. There were some interesting details, like I read that there's one view on this kind of the origin of the Amadeus Salieri mythology, as told in the story of Amadeus. Like, some people think it came from Mozart towards the end of his life, as he was slightly sort of frailer of mind, that he started to have these paranoid delusions and would say to Constanza, I think Salieri is plotting my death. And so actually it came from like a sort of paranoid psychological place. And it was interesting to imagine that, like, what if it actually he's suspicious of Salieri, towards the end, and rightly or wrongly. And then there were other sort of like just other things that I was like, well, that's probably not going to make it into the show. Like that when he died, he sort of swelled up like a balloon and then threw up.
Just quite a way to die.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be tragic. Like when you're, if you had to create a playlist, I mean, for this role, I did think about that in watching it. I was like, I wonder what Mozart would like today. What would be on Mozart's Spotify playlist?
It's an interesting question. Someone else asked a similar thing, and I feel like the one thing that I sort of did notice was that because it's so varied, and he seemed as a person so curious, so like artistically curious and sort of hungry and kind of like voracious, because famously so like very prolific. But I kind of feel like he'd probably be able to vibe with like any genre. Like he'd probably be as kind of fascinated by prog rock as he would jazz, and would probably also have a respect for pop music even. And I found myself noticing like pop chord progressions in his music and sort of feeling, I suppose, his influence on modern music. And yeah, so I like to think that he would be up for anything, musically speaking, and wouldn't be snobby about it. Wouldn't be like, no, it has to be orchestral, it has to be classical. I think he'd be like, whoa, what's that rhythm? Where did that come from?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, like, so when you're going into a project like this, how familiar were you with either the film or the stage version? Like, what was your relationship with it?
Well, I'd seen the film. I watched it as a kid, like with my family, I think, and had knew and loved it, and had sort of like certain like fragments burnt into my memory. Like I remember him sort of like he was like crawling around a room on all fours, pretending to be a dog or something. Yeah. And like the beginning of the film is like in an asylum, right, in a sort of psychiatric hospital. And then I'd read the stage play, but I've never actually seen a production of it. So I had an awareness of the story and of like some previous interpretations. But I tried to approach this and just found myself sort of inevitably, I suppose, doing so, like just kind of approaching it like any other role, really. And I felt in the end I didn't really have to sort of make an active effort to forget everything. I just found that I was forgetting it. Yeah.
I mean, there is a sense when it feels like, I don't know, you tell me, that you could take this character
in a really big direction. Like you could make him very, very big and almost there's almost a camp level to this character. And so like
For sure, yeah.
how do you keep him grounded so that it doesn't approach that territory of camp?
I know what you mean. I mean, I felt like, like I say, like one of the things about this version of the series, of this story, is you get to sort of see the home lives of these characters. And so there's something grounding, I think, about sort of imagining what his day-to-day would be like and sort of feeling how actually some things that other people would find very easy he finds very complicated and difficult. Like he doesn't communicate like a normal person, and there's a lot been written sort of speculatively about, but possibly that he was neurodiverse, which I tried to be aware of, but not to take too literally. I tried not to sort of retro-diagnose him, but definitely even on the page, I felt like there was a sense in which Amadeus was slightly other, and so like the way he sort of moved through the domestic world and managed his relationships, I felt like maybe was quite helpful to ground him in reality and not just see him as this like kind of ethereal, whether it's an angel or a demon, like from who he is from Salieri's perspective. So there was a bit of that, and also I suppose like even sort of musically, I suppose like I felt like because he can't communicate very easily, that the music became almost like the means by which he expresses himself. And so that felt like another way, like I didn't want in any musical set piece to sort of be like, well, he's just playing the music or he's just conducting the music. I wanted to have something to play story-wise or something to communicate. And so whether it was to sort of atone for something or to say something that he hadn't been able to say or whatever it might be, I felt like that was also quite helpful in those set pieces, like to have something to express,
Mm-hmm. And in doing him, like, what did you personally, did you relate to him at all in sort of who he is or who you found him to be?
I mean, I suppose necessarily you have to find a way into the character, and sometimes that's not even like as literal as drawing a Venn diagram. You're just sort of feeling your way into them. So I sort of have to relate to them, but obviously I don't relate to the feeling of being sort of an iconic genius. Yeah. So that I almost had to sort of, and I don't think Mozart in a way is thinking about himself in that way either. He's just like, I've written this music is objectively great. This music needs to be heard by as many people as possible, and it's just like that's the sort of laser beam. So yes and no is the short answer. I sort of necessarily had to find ways to relate to him and to humanize him, but of course, like on paper, there are aspects that are like different and I don't relate to.
Yeah, definitely. What was the biggest struggle then with sort of in terms of maybe even during the process of filming it, but what was the struggle with portraying him?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess, like, I think it's probably trying to marry all of the different instincts and sort of moods and parts of him. Like, and because, he arrives as quite a sort of bright, colourful character full of energy, and that's counter to sort of like Salieri's darker, cooler tones. But then over the course of the series, Mozart also darkens and is kind of ground down by Salieri and by God and by, the events of the series. And so I felt like trying to marry all that and trying to make that consistent was probably like the most exciting challenge. And as I said before, I think the music was actually quite helpful for that, to sort of feel how actually they are on the surface very different pieces of music maybe that you're listening to here, but can you identify like a through line?
Yeah.
That was sort of maybe like part of the approach.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's also like, whenever I see a period piece like this and I think about, the set and the clothes, and it's just all so grand and so big, and and it must get you into character immediately. But also my dumb head immediately goes to, I bet everyone smelled. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I have like where do you have where does the fantasy of the pomp and circumstance meet, for you at least when you're approaching it, the reality of the world then,
Yes, I know what you mean. Well, we were filming in like the height of summer in Budapest and wearing, all the velvet and stuff. So it was very hot, and I, for one, probably did smell quite bad. I was definitely drenched in sweat.
Yeah.
At the end of every filming day, I was peeling the shirt off, like it was just so hot and sweaty. But yeah, I know what you mean. I know that like Julian, the director, was keen for it to feel very lived in and kind of unvarnished. He didn't want it to be a kind of prim, polished world. He wanted it to feel human and messy. And so part of that, I think, is like maybe in the presentation. Like, I loved that Morgan, a designer, for instance, like, there'd be opulent locations and like, luxurious details, but then he'd also put like a sort of scaffolding structure in the middle of the emperor's palace to remind us that they still had to do repairs. Or like there was one scene where there was like just some Christmas trees on the floor, and it was like, because they probably just sort of finished Christmas recently and they haven't packed the trees away yet. And I liked all of those kind of like details.
Yeah, definitely. Well, then when you are doing something like this, your chemistry with Paul must be, I mean, that's a special back and forth. And that's an iconic, at least in terms of sort of the stage version and the film version, that's an iconic pairing, these two performances. So how do you go about setting up that chemistry before you actually get into the work?
Well, I guess there's a rehearsal process, but we didn't rehearse all that much. And I felt like in some ways maybe that was good, because in the earlier scenes that we filmed, Paul and I are still sort of trying to get a sense of each other, like, as the characters are. But then as the series went on, I felt like we developed like I felt very trusting of him, and he's a very generous actor. He's always like extremely well prepared, but he's always sharing the scene and is very present in a sort of collaborative way. And so I felt like as we got to the more challenging end of the series, where, heavier scenes and sort of more time together, I felt like we felt very safe in each other's company, and that really helps. And I guess that just sort of comes from, I don't think it's like we never really sat down and been, so anyway, this relationship, what's it going to be? And sort of writing down key words. It was more just kind of talking around it, discussing, like, I mean, we talked quite a bit about, like, we saw it as kind of like maybe two brothers to a common father in God. And, for Salieri, he feels neglected by God. And like, why are you showering these divine gifts on him when he sort of pays you no respect? And I'm so pious and, perfect, and yet you completely ignore me. And from Mozart's point of view, it's like, yeah, but he's killed me, because it's so physically and existentially exhausting to be like on all the time and the vessel for all of this music for everyone else's benefit. And that's sort of where we end up, is this kind of duality. But I mean, I had a wonderful time working with Paul, and I think it sort of comes from his generosity and like trusting each other, I think.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Paul is one of those actors that it feels like he's been in everything in a weird way. It feels he's done so much over the years that when you go into something like this with someone like him, I mean, it must be exciting for you. Do you take anything from sort of how he works, or how did he make your role better?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess I was sort of excited and nervous to work with him, because I've been, know and love his work and had such a sort of admiration for him, but quickly discovered that he was very approachable, and funny and sort of easy to work with. And I think of course, like, I feel like you necessarily learn something from every job and like every person you work with. And I really respected how well prepared he always was. There's a real humility to him, and also he's very professional. He just sort of wants to understand what the scene is about, and he's thought about it in advance, and he's made some choices, and he's very prepared. And so that always provided like a really rock solid foundation for us to play any scene on. But he's also like not rigid at all. He's very spontaneous and flexible and open, and really like a real good sort of listener. And so I don't know, I just sort of had a lot of fun working with him, and I thought he did an incredible job with the role as well.
Yeah, well, my last question for you is one of the things, as an American fan of yours, one of the things that I find so humorous online sometimes is how, ever since your work in White Lotus, everyone is surprised that you're British. And everyone, the accent immediately throws people, and they're like, what? So how has it been, A, I'm sure you've experienced that people they're surprised by that, but also B, how has it been navigating your career after that huge surge of popularity following White Lotus?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I felt really lucky to be a part of that show, and I, learned a lot from Mike White also, and have had, opportunities since that I might not have otherwise had. I've worked with lots of great people, with Lena Dunham and Jesse Eisenberg and people
that was
that
so
I've
great, by the way, that show.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Loved and admired for such a long time. I mean, one interesting thing I found was that, well, not only the American-British thing, but also because that's the thing, White Lotus is still, I would say, to date, probably the most watched thing I've been a part of. And so, in the UK, for a time, like, a lot of people sort of knew me mostly as a writer-director, like somebody who created a comedy show and had directed films and stuff. And so I feel like there's still a little bit of like a kind of, well, hang on, but aren't you the guy from the White Lotus? Like, trying to marry those two people together,
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you're fantastic in this, and I'm a big fan of your work, and it's been really great watching you ever since White Lotus.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Wonderful. Take care.
He's fantastic. You're going to love it. I like watching him on screen. He's fun to watch. He's nice to watch. You know what I'm saying? Thanks so much for checking out today's episode of the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Leave a rating and review wherever you're listening or watching this. I'm H. Alan Scott on everything. And in the meantime, watch something fun today and have a good one.